The United States European Command is one of 9 Unified Combatant Commands of the United States military, headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany. Its area of focus covers 21 million square miles and 51 countries and territories, including Europe, Russia, Greenland, and Israel. The commander of the United States military EUCOM simultaneously serves as the Supreme Allied Commander, Europe within NATO, an intergovernmental military alliance. During the Gulf War and Operation Northern Watch, EUCOM controlled the forces flying from Incirlik Air Base. History and significant operations. Prior to 1952, the title European Command referred to a single service, United States Army Command. The senior U.S. Army Administrative Command in the European region had previously been designated European Theatre of Operations United States Army from June 8, 1942 July 1, 1945. USFET from July 1, 1945 March 15, 1947. And then EUCOM March 15, 1947 August 1, 1952. The first unified command in the European area was established by the Joint Chiefs of Staff on August 1, 1952. Designated the U.S. European Command, it was established to provide unified command and authority over all U.S. forces in Europe. Prior to August 1, 1952, the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, and U.S. Army presence in Europe maintained separate commands that reported directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The respective titles of the service commands were, Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Air Forces in Europe; Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Naval Forces, Eastern Atlantic and Mediterranean; and Commander-in-Chief, U.S. European Command. In line with the creation of the Joint Service European Command, the Army Command in Europe was redesignated U.S. Army Europe on August 1, 1952. The unified command structure was born of the need to address changes wrought not only by America's rapid post-war demobilization but the end of the occupation of Germany in 1949. Questions arose over the U.S. commitment to the defense of Western Europe against the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Providing for the common defense was a great concern, especially after the Berlin Crisis of 1948–49 when the Soviet Union blocked access to the divided city and the US and United Kingdom responded with an unprecedented airlift. In 1949 the Allies established the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but did little else to meet their new commitments. In 1952 the area of responsibility included continental Europe, the United Kingdom, North Africa and Turkey. The AOR was subsequently expanded to include Southwest Asia as far east as Iran and as far south as Saudi Arabia. In early 1951, NATO established Allied Command Europe and the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was called from retirement to become the first Supreme Allied Commander Europe. The United States sent massive reinforcements to Europe designed to deter the Soviet Union. From 1950 to 1953 United States military personnel in Europe grew from 120,000 to over 400,000. United States Air Forces in Europe grew from 3 groups with 35,000 personnel to 11 wings with 136,000 personnel. 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean doubled to more than 40 warships. United States Army, Europe, grew from 1 infantry division and 3 constabulary regiments to 2 corps with 5 divisions and in November 1950 activated a new field army, 7th Army, at Patch Barracks, Stuttgart. The Army activated the 10th Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg in 1952 and deployed it to Bad Tar Paragraph LZ in November 1953 for unconventional warfare missions in the Soviet bloc countries. To provide for national command within NATO and to help control this buildup of forces, General Eisenhower proposed a separate command for all United States forces in Europe. Because the senior United States commander would continue as Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Eisenhower recommended giving a maximum of delegated authority to a 4-star deputy. Eisenhower returned to the United States just as the new command was established. The first United States Commander-in-Chief Europe was General Matthew Ridgway, former commander of 8th Army and the Far East Command during the Korean War. His deputy was General Thomas T. Handy, commander of United States Army, Europe. Headquarters EUCOM initially shared the IG Farben building in Frankfurt, Germany, with headquarters United States Army, Europe. By 1953 over 400,000 U.S. troops were stationed in Europe. In 1954, the headquarters moved to Camp des Logs, a French army base west of Paris and a short distance from Shape. There, EUCOM prepared plans for the defense of Western Europe within the NATO framework against the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact. EUCOM used the military assistance program to help its NATO partners build their military capabilities, including after 1955 the German Bundeswehr. In 1955, EUCOM established a Support Operations Command Europe, soon renamed Support Operations Task Force Europe for Special Operations Missions. In 1961, EUCOM began operating an airborne command post, Operation Silk Purse. During the 1961 Berlin crisis, on August 25, 1961, the Department of Defense announced 148,000 reserve personnel would be called on October 1 for 12 months of active duty service. 27,000 of these would be from Air Force Reserve and Air National Guard flying squadrons and support units to augment the Air Force, and 112,000 were U.S. Army Reserve. Many Army reservists were sent to Europe to bring ground combat units up to full strength. Civil war broke out in Lebanon in 1958 due to mounting religious and political conflicts. EUCOM conducted a major contingency operation, Operation Blue Bat, in response to Lebanon's request to restore stability within the government. In 1966, following disagreements by the French with certain NATO military policies, President Charles de Gaulle stated that all forces within France's borders would have to come under French control by April 1969. Soon afterward, France announced that Shape and its subordinate headquarters must leave French territory by April 1967. The following year, Shape moved to Mons, Belgium, while headquarters EUCOM moved to Patch Barracks in Stuttgart, Germany. Headquarters 7th Army moved to Heidelberg, where it merged with headquarters United States Army, Europe. At Patch Barracks, EUCOM renovated the buildings, built a new operations center, and modernized communications infrastructure. EUCOM continued to prepare for the defense of Europe and began a series of annual reforger exercises in 1967. Cold War crises continued, including the 1968 Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia. But, because of the Vietnam War, the number of the American forces in Europe slowly declined. Troop strength in Europe fell to 265,000 by 1970. During the 1970s, force protection concerns in Europe increased as terrorist groups, such as the Red Army faction and the Red Brigades, targeted American facilities and personnel with bombings, kidnapping and assassinations. Palestinian terrorist organizations conducted terror operations in Europe, such as the kidnapping of Israeli athletes during the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich. EUCOM and its components continued to provide military assistance throughout Europe, as well as humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, non-combatant evacuation, support to peacekeeping operations, and other non-traditional missions in Europe, Africa and the Middle East. For example, after the Congo became independent in 1960, EUCOM joined in several multinational operations in that country, including peacekeeping, humanitarian assistance, and non-combatant evacuation in 1960, 1964, 1967 and again in 1978. In the Middle East, EUCOM provided military assistance to Israel and non-combatant evacuation of American citizens in 1967, 1973, and 1982–1984. In the late 1970s, the Soviet Union deployed SS-20 intermediate-range ballistic missiles into Eastern Europe and in 1979 invaded Afghanistan. NATO responded with a two-track decision to step up negotiations while deploying American intermediate-range Pershing II missiles and ground-launched cruise missiles to counter Soviet actions. During the 1980s, American forces in Europe increased to over 350,000. EUCOM established Fleet Marine Force Europe in 1980. The 1983 Unified Command Plan transferred responsibility for the Middle East from EUCOM to a new combatant command, U.S. Central Command, but EUCOM retained responsibility for Israel, Lebanon and Syria. At the same time, EUCOM was formally assigned responsibility for Africa south of the Sahara. Thus the area of responsibility became Europe, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Mediterranean littoral. The Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986, together with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colonel Powell, who served from 1989 to 1993, further strengthened the role of combatant commanders. Goldwater-Nichols also established United States Special Operations Command, which led to the activation of a new sub-unified command, Special Operations Command, Europe. During the 1980s, negotiations continued with the Soviet Union on strategic and theater-level arms limitation. In 1987, the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty called an end to the deployment of SS-20s, Pershing IIs and GLCMs. In 1990, NATO and Warsaw Pact members signed a treaty on conventional armed forces in Europe. In 1989, the Soviet Union and other Soviet bloc countries in Eastern Europe collapsed and the Cold War came to an end. The citizens from both East and West Berlin began tearing down the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989. As a sign of reduced tensions, in 1991 EUCOM took its airborne command post off alert. Meanwhile, in 1991, EUCOM and its components provided forces primarily 7th Quarter CENTCOM for Operation Desert Storm. EUCOM supports programs in former Soviet bloc countries such as the Joint Contract Team Program, NATO Partnership for Peace and the National Guard Bureau State Partnership Program. It was also active in operations in the Balkans, including Bosnia, Macedonia and Kosovo. During this time, EUCOM's assigned forces were lowered below 120,000. Since 1990, EUCOM has hosted or co-hosted the annual International Military Chiefs of Chaplains Conference, the only one of its kind in the world, working to foster cooperation among religious leaders and understanding of religion as both a force for war and a force for peace. Immediately after the terrorist attacks against New York and Washington, D.C., on September 11, 2001, NATO invoked Article V of the treaty and deployed NATO early warning aircraft to help monitor the skies over North America. EUCOM provided major forces for subsequent operations in Afghanistan and stepped up its efforts to protect United States interests in Europe and Africa. Subsequent terrorist attacks in the EUCOM theater in Casablanca, Madrid, London and Algiers prompted EUCOM to launch Operation Enduring Freedom Trans-Sahara in 2007 while continuing to provide rotational forces to Afghanistan and Iraq. The 2002 Unified Command Plan transferred responsibility for Lebanon and Syria to CENTCOM, but EUCOM retained responsibility for Israel, and assumed responsibility for Russia and for an increased portion of the North Atlantic, to include Iceland and the Portuguese Azores. Joint Task Force East provided from forces rotating from continental United States, though bases in Bulgaria and Romania, was initially intended to be provided by a rotating US-based brigade. 2 bases at Constanta Poundova, Romania were developed, apparently with the main facility at Mralcoga-Florin-Lisianu airfield. Initially, however, Joint Task Force East was to have been provided by a rotational 2nd Cavalry Regiment Stryker Squadron. The task force was originally planned to be called the Eastern Europe Task Force. However, since the stresses of the Iraq and Afghan deployments, the Army provision of Joint Task Force East has been replaced by a Marine force known as the Black Sea Rotational Force. In 2003, the headquarters reorganized to establish the EUCOM Plans and Operations Center. From 2006 to 2008, EUCOM helped stand up a new geographic Unified Combatant Command, United States Africa Command, which moved to nearby Kelly Barracks and took over responsibility for Department of Defense activities in Africa on October 1, 2008. Timeline. 1967, U.S. European Command Headquarters moves to Patch Barracks, Stuttgart, Germany. 1970, 265,000 U.S. troops stationed in Europe. 1980, 350,000 U.S. troops stationed in Europe. 1983, U.S. Central Command is established and takes over responsibility for DoD activities in the Middle East from EUCOM. 1990, 7 Corps and other USAREUR units are deployed from EUCOM to Saudi Arabia for the Gulf War. 1992, 7 Corps after redeploying from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait is withdrawn from EUCOM and inactivated. 1999, U.S. troops stationed in Europe fall below 120,000. 2002 V Corps is deployed from EUCOM to Kuwait for the Iraq War invasion. 2003, General James L. Jones becomes the first U.S. Marine to be EUCOM commander. 2006, V Corps is deployed from EUCOM to Iraq as the command and control element for multinational corps Iraq. 2008, U.S. Africa Command is established and takes over responsibility for DoD activities in Africa from EUCOM. 2009, Navy Admiral James G. Stavridis becomes EUCOM's 15th commander and the first Navy Admiral to lead the headquarters. 2012, V Corps is deployed from EUCOM to Afghanistan, providing command and control of all United States ground forces engaged in the theater. 2013, V Corps is inactivated after redeploying from Afghanistan, leaving EUCOM without a Corps headquarters for the first time since 1951. Operations == The following list details all operations in which EUCOM has been involved since its inception. Structure: The main service component commands of EUCOM are the United States Army Europe, United States Naval Forces Europe US 6th Fleet, United States Air Forces in Europe and United States Marine Corps Forces, Europe. The United States Army Europe is based in Germany. It controls 2 brigades, 1 aviation brigade, and several supporting units while also providing support to other Army units in Europe. Previously it had 2 divisions, although for almost all of the Cold War it controlled 2 corps of 2 divisions each. V Corps was deactivated in 2013 upon its return from Afghanistan. 7 Corps was deactivated in 1992 after returning to Germany. The Gulf War. The 6th Fleet provides ships to NATO Joint Force Command Naples Operation Active Endeavour, deterring threats to shipping in the Straits of Gibraltar and the remainder of the Mediterranean. Joint Task Force Aztec Silence, a special operations force established under the command of Commander, 6th Fleet, has been involved in fighting Operation Enduring Freedom, Trans-Sahara. It also has a growing role around the shores of West and East Africa, under the direction of United States Africa Command. It previously had a significant Mediterranean presence function against the Soviet Navy's 5th Operational Squadron, and for most of the Cold War was the most powerful maritime striking force along NATO's southern flank. The United States Air Forces in Europe, the Wing Support Command, and 3rd Air Force, USAF's warfighting headquarters are both based at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. They are now much reduced from their high Cold War strength and provide a pool of air power closer to many trouble spots than aircraft flying from the United States. The United States Marine Corps Forces, Europe is headquartered in Panzerkasten in Bar Paragraph Blingen, Germany, and serves as the Marine Corps component of EUCOM. MAFORA is integral in the planning and execution of Black Sea Rotational Force. A subordinate unified command of EUCOM is SOSAIR, headquartered at Patch Barracks in Stuttgart-Vaihingen, Germany. The commander of SOSAIR is Major General Michael S. Repass. Special Forces units within the AOR include the 352nd Special Operations Group of the USAF, based at RAF Mildenhall in the UK, a US Navy SEALs unit, and Naval Special Warfare Unit 2 and 1st BN, 10th Special Forces Group located at Panzerkasten, Germany. EUCOM is also headquartered at Patch Barracks in Stuttgart-Vaihingen, Germany. The Iceland Defence Force also formed part of EUCOM from 2002 to 2006, when it was transferred from Joint Forces Command in the October 2002 Unified Command Plan change. The Kaiserslautern military community is the largest U.S. community outside of the U.S., while the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center is the largest U.S. military hospital overseas, treating wounded soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan. Service components United States Army Europe, 2nd Stryker Cavalry Regiment, Vilseck, Germany, 173rd Airborne Brigade Combat Team, Vicenza, Italy, 12th Combat Aviation Brigade, Ansbach, Germany, 7th Army Joint Multinational Training Command, Grafenwohr, Germany, U.S. Army NATO Brigade, Heidelberg, Germany, 19th Battlefield Coordination Detachment, Kaiserslautern, Germany, 10th Army Air and Missile Defense Command, Kaiserslautern, Germany, 21st Theater Sustainment Command, Kaiserslautern, Germany, 18th Engineer Brigade, Schwetzingen, Germany, 16th Sustainment Brigade, Bamberg, Germany, 18th Military Police Brigade, Simch, Germany, 405th Army Field Support Brigade, 409th Army Contracting Support Brigade, 7th Civil Support Command. Kaiserslautern, Germany, 266th Financial Management Center. United States Naval Forces Europe, United States 6th Fleet, Navy Region Europe. United States Air Forces in Europe, 3rd Air Force. United States Marine Corps Forces, Europe, U.S. European Command administers the low-profile U.S. military storage installations in Israel. William Arkin in his book Codenames revealed the locations of some of the American bases in Israel. Arkin writes that the sites do not appear on maps, and their exact locations are classified. According to the book, some of the sites are located at Ben Gurion Airport, Nevatim, Ovda Air Base, and in Herzliya Pichua. The sites are numbered as Site 51, Site 53, Site 54, Site 55, and Site 56. Some of the depots are underground, others were built as open hangars. According to Arkin, Site 51 holds ammunition and equipment in underground depots. Site 53 is munitions storage and war reserve vehicles at Israeli Air Force bases. Site 54 is an emergency military hospital near Tel Aviv with 500 beds, and Sites 55 and 56 are ammunition depots. Subordinate Unified Commands Special Operations Command, Europe Euro. Additional supporting units George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies, NATO School, Joint Intelligence Operations Center Europe Analytics Center. Commanders-in-Chief/Commanders, previously, this position held the title Commander-in-Chief, United States European Command. However, following an order dated October 24, 2002 by Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, all CINCs in the United States military were retitled commanders, and the use of CINC as an acronym was forbidden. See also. Notes. References, Duke, Simon. U.S. Military Forces and Installations in Europe, Oxford University Press for SIPRI, 1989. External links, official website.